Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. My name is Elisa Klein, and I am the newish director of NERI Press and Training Center. As you may know, Joan Tabachnick, NERI Press's previous director, who is now pursuing her federal fellowship at the SPART office of the U.S. Department of Justice, was slated to host this webinar today, but due to illness, she has the flu. She wasn't able to be here, so I will be hosting. Welcome to all of you. We are so excited about today's webinar. It's called Applying Indigenous-Based Work with Indigenous and Western Communities, and it is being presented by Russell Smith and Joy Tea Wiata, all the way from New Zealand. Before turning this over to them, I want to take a moment to tell you about NERI Press and Training Center. Our mission is to share cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. For many years, we accomplished that mission by publishing and selling books by the leading researchers, clinicians, and practitioners in the field. But with changes in the last several years in the publishing and technology worlds, we've expanded how we disseminate knowledge. Over the last 5 years, NERI Press and Training Center has also offered online courses, a free monthly newsletter, in-person trainings, and these webinars that are delivered by our internationally recognized authors and experts in the field. By discussing the most pressing questions and developments in the field, meeting your most urgent training needs, and offering a training platform to the presenters that you want to hear from the most, we continue to achieve our goal of bringing cutting-edge information and education to those of you working with youth and adults who are at risk to perpetrate sexual harm. I believe I need to share my screen. I thought it was being shared. Hold on just a second, please. Tim, it's telling me that I am in fact sharing my screen, so I'm not sure why folks aren't seeing it. Are you seeing it now?
No, we're not. Can you just try clicking the stop button and then clicking the play button again? Looks like Elisa disconnected. She's coming right back. There you go.
Okay, I was kicked off of the Citrix, so my apologies to everyone. Okay, so I would just like to say that we appreciate our communication with you, and we love engaging with you when you send us suggestions, input, feedback, and we are very open to positive and negative responses. So we encourage you to contact us with your questions, critiques, or suggestions. Just out of curiosity, how many people have participated in a NERI Press webinar before? We're going to launch a poll, and you can let us know if you have been part of this. Okay, I see that 81% of you, 83% of you have participated in the past in one of our webinars. I'm glad that you keep coming back. That's wonderful. So to move forward, I will talk more about this at the end, but if you find these webinars helpful, we hope that you'll consider becoming a sponsor of the series. Kind of like NPR and other public services, it's your donations that help make this series happen. I'd like to suggest that you consider becoming a sponsor of the series, which guarantees you a seat for every webinar in the entire series. And as a sponsor, we not only register you and 15 members of your organization for each webinar, but we also offer you a free gift of 2 of MIRI Press's books, Current Perspectives and Current Applications, or 2 other books if you already have these 2. It's your support that allows us to continue to bring you these free resources. As with all workshops, I need to let you know the learning objectives. Participants will gain some insight to Indigenous practice, learn what Indigenous therapies have to offer to the harmful sexual behavior sector, and lastly, consider an invitation to developing relationships with Indigenous practitioners. I also want to let you know that the PowerPoint and YouTube recording of this webinar will be posted on the MIRI Press website within a week after the webinar's completion. And lastly, when the workshop is over, be sure to answer the short survey at the end. We love your feedback, and it's very helpful to us. And you should also know that in about a week, we'll send you a follow-up email with a link to the recordings and to a certificate of attendance that you can download. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Joy and Russell are highly experienced Maori clinical practitioners in New Zealand, delivering a unique treatment service in the sexual violence, harmful behaviors sector, providing treatment, prevention, and education to adult perpetrators of sexual harm and to children and young people with inappropriate or harmful sexual behavior. In a 2012 survey, the programs they were responsible for had the highest retention rate for clients in community programs across their country. So now I'll hand this over to our presenters to do their presentation. Here you go, Russell and Joy. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Okay. Kia ora, good morning. Firstly, what we're going to do is we're just going to start out with a what we normally do is with a karakia, and then we're going to introduce ourselves the way that we would always normally introduce ourselves. He noi tātou, e te atua kia ora rā mo tō manaki e mātou, mo tō āwhena, mo te aroha, hakapanga mātou, mo tō tautoko o te kōrero o te mahi a Tihewa Mauriora. Just like to welcome you all to our webinar this morning, talking about our practice here in New Zealand. And I'm going to introduce myself, ko Imi Tamonga, ko Imi Tamonga, ko Awaroa Te Awa, ko Whangaroa Te Moana. Nuki Aldrich, tuku matua, Doreen Mai Renata, tuku whae tūpuna, tahawai Ngāti Paki, tuku hapu, ngāpuhi Ngāti Kahu, ki Whangaroa tuku iwi. Just to give you a little bit of background around myself, this is my family. These are the people that stand with me in my work and in our work as we do our work around the country. And most importantly, I'm a father of 3 adult children, and I'm a grandfather to 9 grandchildren. So it's lovely to be here today and to be with you all.
Tēnā koutou katoa, welcome and greetings. Ko tainui te waka, tararo te maunga, o taki te awa Ngāti Raukawa te iwi, nai te horu rawa ko Ngāti Kuriki ngā hapu, ko Raukawa te marae, ko Joy te Wiata te kuingoa. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and look forward to sharing this webinar with you.
So a little bit about the work that we do is we members, Joan and I sit on what they call a paitaka wainga of Te Ohaki Ahine, National Network Ending Sexual Violence Together, which is a group of all of the representatives of all of the sexual violence specialists here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And Joan and I sit on the Ngā Kaitaki Māori, which is the Māori, kaupapa Māori side alongside our Tauiwi caucus. We're also members of NZATSA, and most of you may or may not know about NZATSA. Similar to ATSA, that's the Australian New Zealand Association for Treatment of Sexual Abuse. We've been part of NZATSA and Tues for quite a number of years, and most of the people that are within those associations work within our field of practice.
Thank you, Alyssa, for your introduction and of Quota By Terminal, which is the service that we founded some years ago now. It's the only Indigenous service here in New Zealand in the harmful sexual behaviour sector. So we practice, our practice is grounded in Te Ao Māori, which is a Māori worldview, and our primary, we are an intervention and prevention service. Our intervention, as we were saying before, is harmful sexual behaviour, and we primarily work with Māori who have harmed, but we also work with non-Māori. As we speak about our work this morning, we just want to first of all acknowledge the taonga or the treasures that have been passed to us by our elders. We draw on cultural traditions, we draw on a wealth of wisdom and ancient narratives that our ancestors have left us, and we speak about them specifically as they apply to harmful sexual behaviour. We'll use some of our Indigenous language, as we have already. Kura Wai Tūmanako, for example, the name of our organisation, means a garment of hope, and that's what we offer at the people we work with. So although we offer translations, we know that the translations are an ill fit with the meaning that lies within the words that we're using from our language, but they'll help us get along this morning. And also just to say that when we talk about our Indigenous concepts, we're only talking about some of the shades of meaning as they apply specifically to the harmful sexual behaviour sector. So Māori sources of knowledge are critical to our practice, content and delivery, and our knowledge has been traditionally passed across generations through our ancestral oral traditions. Our knowledge and history is also found in the carvings in our meeting houses, which are on our maraes, which are our traditional meeting places. And the knowledge is found, the stories, our narratives are found in the carvings, the weavings, and the other patterns that are found in our meeting houses. So when we talk about our cultural knowledge and our cultural principles, our goal in our work is to utilise those principles as clinical tools, if you will, to bring about change and in the prevention of harmful sexual behaviour. So what we're going to do is just share a few little glimpses of our work, and I want to begin with karakia. What karakia for us is prayer, and that's what Russell started with this morning. So every time we meet with whānau, and when we're talking about whānau, we're talking about extended family, and that can be really broad, across aunties, cousins, in-laws, everyone is included within that larger concept of whānau. When we meet with them in the first instance, we always begin with karakia as an acknowledgement to our source of life. And that using karakia offers us the opportunity to pause and for the whānau to think about the reason that they are in this particular meeting at this particular time. It's also an opportunity for them and for us to reduce anxiety prior to engaging in a process that is likely to be fairly difficult. Karakia also helps us to intercept some emotions such as that might be particularly raw, like humiliation or anger, either towards ourselves or to the whānau member that has had the harmful sexual behaviour. On occasions when we have particularly aggravated members of whānau present, we might extend the karakia until we're aware of a shift in the room and a sense of calm before we move on to further conversation. So karakia is, in terms of a Māori way of moving forward, is essential for people to understand, to understand that safety is present, that we are safe here, that we are joining together in a safe process. So it's something that we make sure that always occurs. And karakia is also the beginning of a process we call whanaungatanga, which simplistically put is about a process of meaningful connection. And it holds the notion that all living things are interconnected, and it's an acknowledgement of all people, past, present and future, and includes those in the spiritual realm. So the next step in our whanaungatanga, so the first step was karakia, the next step is what Russell and I just did in our way of introducing ourselves. Starting, for example, when I said ko tararua te maunga, what I'm saying is the mountain that sheltered me are the tararuas. Ko Otaki te awa, the Otaki river is the water that sustains me and my people. Ko Raukaua te marae, that's the meeting place that nurtured me and my people. And then we went on to say who we were, and that all of these people and all of these things came before us and gave us life. So this process helps us to establish connections between us and the whānau we're meeting with. It strengthens safety. And the whakapapa connections, we call this whakapapa or genealogy if you like. What it does, it requires us to take up positions of responsibility and accountability to each other.
So I'd like to pick up on language, because language is really important, and about how language and the impact of that on our workers. Take, for example, the word that you see in front of you called tamaariki. Now, loosely translated, when they first translated into English, they translated it as children. However, what we know is, what was given to us by our elders, was that tamaariki is nothing to do with children. In fact, tamaariki does mean child, but the first part, tama, T-A-M-A, which is a child, and ariki, which is of our ancestral guardians. So when we look at the word tamariki, translated more effectively, as a child that is a gift to us from our spiritual guardians. So when we consider these, the way that language is used, we're re-lensing and revisioning the way that we talk with our people, which means that I enjoy and others and everyone that sits with us are also gifts of our guardians. So the re-lensing of that, because the nature of our work, where they haven't valued the person, especially when we're talking about sexual violence and harmful sexual behaviour, which is done in isolation. So tamariki gives them a broader context to sit within and acknowledges the way that that they're not sitting alone, as Joy has mentioned, talking with our ancestors, talking with people around us and all of the whānau and family. So it brings those people into the room. While they might not be physically there, we acknowledge them there to reduce the isolation. So the children, tamariki and rangatai, that we've worked with over the years in Aotearoa acknowledge even the most basic level that they are different. Now, regardless of their understanding or choice of culture, many of them know a great deal about being Maori. It just isn't something they know how to talk about. So every time that they walk into a room, the colour of their skin immediately defines and creates a dynamic for them, and they are prescribed identity based on their ethnicity, whether we like it or not. Even without the offending, our people are very aware they stand apart from the dominant white culture in our society. They are identified as being different, not always, but very often this difference has been problematic. We take a position that acknowledges difference, and we don't see difference to be in some way lacking, but rather to be celebrated in our efforts towards reducing recidivism. Key to the work we're doing is to assist our people to revalue themselves and others. We offer them ideas that enable them to begin to ascribe alternative meanings to their experiences of culture and identity. What we found is that as they grasp hold of this concept of revaluing, of adding value, they can then begin to revision their futures. That is a future without harm. Although Western knowledge historically informs preferred ways of working with our tamariki and rangatahi, our youth and our people, our preferred position is that Māori knowledge can enhance the view of our young people have of themselves. It speaks of them being a gift and of having value, tamaariki. This enhances their identity and provides them with a place to stand, and gives them a whenua to claim their tūranga waiwai, which is our language, is a place for them to stand where the work, the difficult journey of the work that we're doing with them to begin.
And when we think about our tūranga waiwai, our people immediately think about their marae, which, as I said before, is our ancestral meeting place, and it's the place where traditionally we were raised and nurtured. We also think about pōwhiri. Now, pōwhiri is a ceremonial welcoming process that occurs when you visit a marae, and I think you can see in the slide, I think we've got one there of Prince William giving a hongi to somebody and someone else doing a bit of a haka.
It means to rub noses, by the way. It's a form of greeting.
And that's part of a ceremonial welcoming process. Now, I just want to speak a little bit about the marae and pōwhiri process and some of the ways that we've used it in the work that we do. So these are just specific examples, really. Excuse me. So when we approach our marae, we're visiting a marae, we always wait at the gate or the space before. There's usually a ground in front of the marae. We wait before that, and we can't enter onto that space until there's a call, there's an invitation. And that space in between, we call it the marae atia, and it's a space that has a lot of spiritual significance. And the only way we can move forward is if there's a karanga. Now, a karanga is a particular call that is sent out by one of the home people who are standing on the marae, and until you hear that call, you can't step forward. Now, it's always initiated by one of the women who is authorised to call others forward. And there is a pause when that woman comes out onto the veranda of the marae. Everybody that is waiting comes and assembles and quietens themselves at the gate. So it's a moment right there where we think about why we're here for this particular meeting, and to consider the people that have gone before us across the space. then the karanga goes out, and the group that's waiting moves forward in response. And so there's then a toing and froing. The people who are visiting respond with a call back, and then there's another call from the home side. So there's an invitation and there's a response to it, and so there's a negotiating of space as the visitors are moving forward. And then at another point along the way, the visitors will pause for a moment, and again it's to acknowledge the importance of where they're standing and the ancestors that are standing with them and the people that stand about them. And then eventually the call from the home people continues until we enter into the meeting house. And I guess we could liken that to being here today. The call, or the karanga, if you like, the invitation we received to be here from Joan, was given to us from Joan, and we responded. And there's been a toing and froing of the karanga until eventually here we are at this reasonably early hour here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and together we're entering the space. So, and in the same way that we would on a marae, once you're in the wharenui or the meeting house, we'd begin with a karakia. We've done that this morning. We've done whakawhanaungatanga, and that we have introduced ourselves. We've told you a little about who our family is. We've told you how we're situated in our work, and so that you know who we are and how we are connected to you. Excuse me. We've introduced you to a few of our kupu, our words, and the importance of our tikanga for our Māori people to create safety and prevent harm from occurring. So in the same way, let me just talk to you a little bit about a story with one of our clients. This is a young man who was about 20 years of age, and he was familiar with his own marae and had been in and out of it lots of times, and he knew a lot about his own culture, and yet somehow he'd still managed to perpetrate sexual harm. So this particular day we decided to take him to his marae, and his mother came with us. Russell and the young man stood at the gate and had a discussion about what they were doing there and the importance of crossing over the space. And the question was asked, would you cross the space without someone calling you, without the karanga? If there was a visitor to the marae, would they cross that space without a karanga? If you were a visitor to someone else's marae, would you cross that space without the karanga? And he was absolutely adamant that there is no way he would step onto that space that was sacred without hearing that invitation first, without being authorised to move forward. And very quickly he began to, we were able to draw a parallel to the being called into a space between people, and particularly where his harmful sexual behaviour had occurred, that you don't move into the sacred space of another without authorisation, without that call. And to make further sense of that, you know, the wharenui, or the ancestral meeting house, another name for the wharenui is the whare tangata. Now, the whare tangata is the house of the people, and it's the same words or same name that's given to a woman's body or her womb. She's the house of the people. From her comes life. So when we talk about going into the wharenui, we're talking about going into the womb of our ancestor. So this young man caught the meaning really quickly. We were able to use ideas or notions or principles or narratives that made a lot of sense to him from our own cultural background. And he quickly realised that by his sexual harm, he had moved unauthorised and without invitation into a sacred space and had violated a sacred tikanga. And our tikanga, when we talk about tikanga, that's sacred ways, the ways we live our lives, the things that give us guidance. So the focus of that visit was to reconnect him to an identity of mana and of respect and integrity should he choose to step into it. Now, when we stepped into the whare nui, his mother walked him around the whare. Now, in our whare nui, around the walls, there are photographs of some of our ancestors that have gone before us. So only people who have deceased actually have their photographs in our whare nui. So she walked around and she introduced him to each of these ancestors, and he knew that the pictures were there, but he didn't know any of their stories. And she started telling him about his people and about their lives and about the deeds or that they had done of honour. And we paused so that he could begin to think about the significance of those relationships and the potential of significance of those relationships that he could have to those people. She said to him, these are your people, you're one of them and you're one of us. And so her knowledge about that helped that young man to realise, to find his place again or his way back to an identity of mana and integrity amongst his own people.
So when we consider the whole thing around Porphyry and Marae around developing relationships, which is really critical to therapy with the people that we work with, because they become so disconnected in their offending and the harm that they've done, that the key in reconnecting them is taking them to these sacred spaces and then knowing that when the police aren't watching them, when we're not watching them, when their family's not watching them, there's always someone that's watching them. Not just to keep them safe, but also to watch over them and care for them. So that's part of the concept around it. You know, one of the things that when we're talking about healthy relationships, one of the relationships that we have is around Te Tiriti o Waitangi. The document you see was almost burnt, and it was signed by a number of our ancestors between the British colonialists and the colonists, and also our people, what they call the whakamunenga, which is the Council of Chiefs. Contention has surrounded our people for over 160 years. We have become somewhat well versed in participating in some of the most contentious and robust conversations now marked in our country's history. Just mentions the words colonisation, foreshore and seabed, land confiscation, marginalisation, and I can feel the room getting warmer just mentioning these very few. This is not new to Māori, but not only does it impact our personal lives, but in our professional lives and relationships. We are required to work with contentious conversations due to the sheer nature of our work, sexual offending on children. Māori knowledge is not widely viewed as offering a serious contribution to counselling psychologies, and any divergence from mainstream practices comes at the risk of further contention. Despite this, the key for us to consider is how we will engage with the nature of the contention. We are required to step into a place that holds the people we work with, while challenging and supporting them to take responsibility. Our pathway forward is through revaluing our Māori knowledge and principles. On a personal note around relationship and changing principles, my name is Kora Rārika Arunata Toitoi. My name, Kora Rārika, comes from what used to be known as the hellhole of the Pacific. And it's the Bay of Islands, now known as the Bay of Islands, which is a lovely place to visit during the summertime. I got my name from an incident in history before the colonial days. A chief from that area, one of my ancestors, on his deathbed, said to his children to the effect, "Ho mai ki Kora Rārika." In other words, bring me a sweet blue penguin to eat, and which they did before he passed into the veil to be with our ancestors. So I used to think, Not only was I known as the hellhole of the Pacific, my tupuna saw fit to dish me up as main course in the Last Supper. On top of this, my friends as I grew up couldn't pronounce my name or made fun of it. It was recent years that I was told of how I got my name to a friend in a kaumātua from the Tainui region, who in a fleeting second repositioned me into a place of honour in mana. He said, "Kora raka, what an honour that you have been chosen to be food and sustenance for our chiefs. This is a mana kōrero that supports me in reframing who I am. It offers me a place where I can honour myself and all who I meet in honouring those who come into our space." So in that, we're talking about Te Ao Māori. We're talking about the worldview cannot be mapped out in Te Ao Pākehā. But
so Te Ao Māori, as Russell mentioned, can't be mapped well onto Te Ao Pākehā, which is, when we say Te Ao Māori, it's a Māori worldview, and Te Ao Pākehā is a Western worldview, and vice versa. You know, our knowledge, our Māori knowledge, our understandings, our descriptions, our language don't fit comfortably into a Western worldview. I also want to just touch here on gendered language and definitions that dominate in English language, which are not present in the same way in ours. Māori are often, amongst ourselves, we understand ourselves as a whakapapa people, a people that stem from, we have a genealogy that's alive and our ancestors are present with us. We speak about being mokopuna of our tupuna, that is, we are the grandchildren of our ancestors, but we're also the ancestors of our grandchildren. And we hold these roles simultaneously. So to have very clearly role-defined spaces, taking up role-defined spaces, gender-defined spaces, is more difficult for us as Māori. And yet we hold our roles as Tāne and Wahine, and the work that we do. When I speak of Tāne and Wahine, I'm talking about men and women, and we acknowledge that we are men and women. We acknowledge that women are the whare tangata, that we are the ones that give birth, that we continue life, and yet we are referenced in relation to the other, to the extent that there is a sense for us that wahine or women cannot exist without Tāne, and that Tāne cannot, or men cannot exist without wahine. So the importance for us is that there is a balance that comes from the interconnectedness or whakawhanaungatanga, as I talked about earlier, of all living things through our whakapapa or our genealogy. And central to our work with Tāne who have offended is to address some of the profound effects of colonisation that's seen, an internalisation, if you like, of Māori women as being inferior to Māori men. Now, this came with colonisation and the Victorian idea that women were chattels of males. And we have internalised that to a large degree, and our wahine are not, or women are not, are very often not treated with the same respect that traditionally we were given. So part of our work is to restore the critical balance between women and men, and in doing that it becomes a very profound sexual violence prevention tool. As an Indigenous kaupapa Māori sexual violence delivery service, we are a minority culture in our own land, and we continue to grapple with the acceptance of approaches to practice that diverge from dominant culture and cultural understandings and approaches. There is a small but growing body of literature and Indigenous research in our sector. and primarily it is practice such as ours that is producing evidence of effectiveness.
So what does this mean for Indigenous Treatment Centre here in New Zealand? What Indigenous clinical practice here, what do we actually have to offer non-Indigenous clients and practitioners? The Department of Corrections research into its present. Hello?
I just wanted to, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you had asked for a warning when you have about 5 minutes left, and we're at that point.
Great.
Please,
Right.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. So what do we have to offer? The Department of Corrections research into its present and treatment of child sex offenders at Te Piriti Special Treatment Unit, Paemuramo, demonstrates that tikanga Māori interventions can have significant clinical benefits for Māori inmates. Rehabilitation. Māori men who completed the program were reduced quite lowered their recidivism quite significantly from 13.58% down to 4.41%. So that's a significant increase. At the time, the research provides a hard evidence that specialist interventions for Māori offenders can reduce reoffending and at the same time have no negative effect, indeed can even have a positive effect on non-Māori offenders. So, in brief, what do we have to offer? We believe that if we don't give our people, or all people, the right to all aspects of therapeutic delivery and treatment, which includes Indigenous practice, then we forfeit of some of the practices that we use, and we, I guess we don't give what we know is we don't give them the full brief and full raft of experience and that they could have when coming into treatment. I mean, we're actively partnering with other services, literally taking what whānau bring and weaving it through the treatment. Our whānau, they're experts also of their experience. The people that come through our doors, including the support people, are experts. And so their knowledge is really important to some of the most effective treatment outcomes. And that's part of what it means to do, like Joy's mentioned earlier, whanaungatanga, learning how to have a relationship, how to develop those relationships with the knowledge that they bring, and how do we apply that into treatment. And so it's stretched us, it's stretched our men, it's stretched our whānau, but in doing that, what it has done is it created us quite a significant help to our people. In closing, our name of our service is Quota By Terminal. We spoke briefly about it at the beginning, being a garment of hope. Our people, or all people that come into who commit sexual harm, don't have a lot of hope. They don't have a lot to sing about. They don't have a lot to be happy about. But we know that by valuing themselves and putting them into a space where we can start the difficult conversations of the harm, they need to be in a good space. So to do that, it takes us to develop and to restore their own their self-identity, who they are, so that they can sit with the difficult conversations in going forward in treatment. So look, thank you for today. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to be with us today. It's a lovely morning here in New Zealand. We are ahead. We're in the future. The future's looking good outside.
Back to the future.
So for all of those of you that are in the past, like tonight, the future's looking good. So nō reira, ka mihi kia koutou, he tautoko, he manaakitanga kia koutou, tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. And it's just a brief farewell. So we just want to open up the floor. So we'll just
take the slides down?
We'll hand it back to our people in wherever they are.
I hope you can see my screen now. Thank you so much, Russell and Joy. That was incredible. We really, really appreciate your making yourselves available at, what time in the morning is it? Just so early in the morning from New Zealand.
Oh, it's a bit later now, but yeah.
It's okay. It's the first coffee. Time for our first coffee.
Well, we're very pleased that you're here with us. So the audience has a chance for a little bit to ask some questions. I hope that we have some. Let me check, because we'd love. Ready? Please do. Please type your questions into the question box. Okay, so we have a question here that says, I love the importance of values and of bringing in family and community into this space for treatment. If someone does not have the same values and traditions, how can they be brought into the marae?
What we've found with people who are so-called non-indigenous, we find that when we look back historically, for example, we worked with a young man who has a Scottish background from Scotland, and we're able to use his past, and so it's around helping them find their identity. While people come in, they might not know a lot about their past or their history. More often than not, it's a bit like going on doing genogram and that, and finding about who they are, and finding those narratives and stories. So that's how people who are non-indigenous, about finding those stories.
And we can also bring them directly onto a marae, whether they're Māori or non-Māori, and have similar discussions, because as soon as we start to talk about ancestors, we support them to link into their own, the richness of their own heritage. So what the marae does, or the meeting place does, it gives an opportunity, it's a space that invites, if you like, it draws us to have those kinds of discussions in a very natural way. So, and many non-Māori people that have come with us on part of the journey, sometimes they've been supporting Māori men in the program, and other times they've been supporting non-Māori. They've felt that it's been a place of welcome, and they've been very comfortable coming into that space. But to bring them into that space, the reality is you need to build a relationship here in New Zealand with, and it's not difficult to do, with the elders of a particular marae, and that's the and that's how you get the invitation to step forward into that space.
So we have another question. Somebody writes here, the information you shared about the reduction in recidivism rates is impressive. Can you speak more about that, and also retention and treatment? Is that part of your success?
Yes, well, the research that was done at Tabachnick, which is a correctional unit here with the government Department of Corrections. That was done by Rawiri Hillman, Lavinia Nathan, and also the psychologist at that time was principal psychologist. We've got the research, we'll put the link up for them. But what it does, what they found was that when you're connecting people back into their to a culture, their culture, that the work that they do adds more cohesion for treatment, and because they're starting to re-lens and revalue themselves, which is the principles that we work from, then they start to value, one, their learning, but also two, the people around them. And that's how, when we look at harm, they've chosen not to value the person that they've offended against. The offending begins in the mind, we know that, around their thoughts. So changing their thought patterns, revaluing their thoughts of themselves is a way of reduction.
When we talk about the retention rates, so Russell was talking about the corrections programs, and obviously retention there, they haven't got very far to go, but retention rates in terms of community service programs such as ours, there was a survey done a few years ago, which is what Russell was also referring to. At that time, we were operating our program out of a mainstream service, and so what the outcome was that people who were in our programs, our kaupapa Māori programs, the retention rate was the highest than any other programs that were operating at that time. Now, what we believe makes a difference is that one is that the whānau and families are in every case involved with the people in our program. If they don't have family, close family to support them, our system is such, our iwi or tribal system is such that we have what we call hapu, which are sub-tribes, and we have elders of those tribes. So there's always some level of connection where we can find people to come and support the people that we're working with. So that raises a level of accountability for the people in our programs. And the whānau come along with the men very often, and are linked into our program in particular ways.
One of the comments that was made, and it might be a small comment, but it was a comment nonetheless. One of our receptionists, she said she'd been with the service for many years. She said, we know the difference between the people that come into your group and the people that are going to the mainstream group. And she made this comment saying that the ones, you could tell the ones coming to our group because they were laughing and smiling and talking to each other. And that's significant, especially when you consider that we've worked with with hundreds of men and hundreds of school-aged children, because that's evidence of what they look forward to. I mean, you know, coming into offender treatment, you know, harmful sexual behaviour treatment isn't, like we say, it doesn't hold a lot of hope, but yet here we have people gladly talking to each other, they're cheerful, you know, and we're not going to be talking about some cheerful stuff, but yet they bring that into that space because we know that creates, that's part of creativity, and then learning to open up that space to reduce harm.
I think one of the things too in that vein is that the people that come to us, you know, when we do that whanaungatanga process where we're linking to one another, what it does is it starts to demolish some of those structures that that create that position of we're here and we've got something to give you, we are above you in some way, and what it says is we are whānau here together, we are family here together, that you have a contribution to make to this process, and we have a contribution to make to the process as well. So it's about acknowledging that there is more to this person than the identity that offended. There are identities of mana that we know are present and that we are drawing people into. And like that young man, you know, the knowledge that I spoke about, the knowledge that his mother had, that was a significant intervention for him, was critical. It was something that she brought that we couldn't possibly have done. So I think just, you know, that whole, it's not so much you're the client and I'm the therapist, although there are clear roles that we do play, and there's a respect for those roles, but there's an acknowledgement that there is mana in who you are and there is mana in who we are, and together we're going to walk forward.
You know, some of the families that we've worked with over the years, they completed treatment like 9-10 years ago when we worked with them. They're still involved with us. They still come and see us. They still talk to us. We've had men come back and help other men that we're working with. And so what draws those men and what draws those family back? Well, this is what has drawn them back. The connection, the valuing, and all those sorts of paradigms that come from being part of our indigenous culture, which is Maori.
We had a, sorry.
Go ahead. We have a few more questions and only just another minute, but please finish and I'll ask you one more question, I think.
I was just going to say we had one of our elders, a woman who had heard that we had a special event for the current group of men we were working with, and she had heard that in the community from one of the men that were in the program. So when she heard this was on, even though her grandson was no longer in our program, she and her husband came along to the open event, which was for whānau, for families. Now, when we did our whanaungatanga, where everybody goes around and introduces themselves in the way that we did this morning, she stood up and spoke about how the kind of change that her grandson had made in the program. So what the impact of that on the men that were currently in the program was that it gave them a huge amount of hope to know that this was only a place they were in at this time and that they would pass through. So, and that there was a hopeful future for them. So these are the kind of interactions that we have.
Wonderful, thank you. We could do this for hours, I think. It's the information that you're sharing is so fascinating and informative. I'm going to ask you one more question that somebody has posed, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to end. Do you only work with those who have harmed, or do you work with the survivors of harm as well? If so, in what ways?
You can't. A high percentage of the people we work with have experienced sexual violence themselves or some form of domestic violence. You can't work with the harm without working with the victimization or with their own trauma. We get asked quite often, what's dealing with their trauma got to do with their harm? We just want them to stop harming. Well, what we say is if you don't get to the trauma, if you don't work with people who bring that trauma, we don't work with that, then we can't get to their understanding of the harm that they've done. So dealing with the trauma and settling that is most critical to good practice, well, not only good practice, good treatment outcomes.
And a lot of the sexual harm here in New Zealand is within the whānau groups. So very often there's a victim who is a family member, and so very often we come into contact with those survivors, if you like, as part of the work that we are doing. Now, in most cases, we refer those people to a survivor, a therapist who's working with survivors, so we're separating it out a little. But in saying that, we also invite them back in, and we do this really carefully, depending on what relationships are being maintained with the family and the age of the people who have been harmed. So lots of things to be taken into account, but very often they give direct contribution into ongoing safety plans for the people who have harmed. So they become an integral part of the work.
So in short, yeah, we do. We work with victims here. We work with victims of sexual crime. Sometimes the victim and the perpetrator are the same person.
Thank you, Russell and Joy, so much. We're going to move on because we only have a minute left and we just have some last details to get to. Our CE process recently changed, and paid CE credits will be available for psychologists and social workers for this webinar. For details about how to obtain the CE credits, please visit nearypress.org/webinars and read through our new CE process. If you still have questions after that, you can email Kristen, who is on the website as the contact person. I'd also like to let you know that we publish a free monthly newsletter in which we discuss a new or controversial journal article or research paper and examine its implications for clinicians and the field. You're automatically signed up for this resource, and we hope you'll find it useful. Please consider becoming a sponsor for our 2017-18 webinar series that will begin in September. We're developing an exciting brand new slate of webinars for the new season, driven by the feedback that you, our audience, have provided this year about which topics would be most useful to you. As a sponsor, we send you those 2 NEARY Press books that are very popular, Current Applications and Current Perspectives. It is $98 sponsorship for individuals and $250 for organizations. If you're interested in becoming a sponsor, please contact us directly at info@nearypress.org. You can find information about sponsorship on our website. And this is a list of our wonderful sponsors, both organizational sponsors and individual sponsors. We would love to have you join this great list. And finally, thank you so much again to Joanne Russell for such a great webinar, and a huge thank you to all of you for attending. I'd like to say again how much we welcome your feedback, so please do be sure to complete your evaluation form when you close out the webinar. Thank you so much for being with us, and this concludes the webinar.